usually the way folks think about morality today is they'll say it's a social construct. And so you previously said that in order to have morality, you have to believe in an absolute being, some kind of transcendent God or truth. But usually the comeback that I hear is, no, I don't need to believe in that. Years of evolution have shown us that in order to survive, we have to have morality, and that's just this construct that everyone has created and that we all agree to.
Yeah, I would say several things. First of all, regarding ethics. So going back to even just basic ideas of the average science guy on campuses, I can only believe those things but I can see, taste, touch, and feel. You can't see, taste, touch, and feel and ought. So morality deals with what we ought to do. When most people, you have to make a distinction between being descriptive about ethics. So if we were to look at another culture and we were to describe what they do, and they're like, here's their ethical system, that's being descriptive, you know what I mean? An ethical discussion deals with what we ought to do. So as Americans, we have certain cultural norms, like a middle finger is offensive, and someone else might show the bottom of their shoe, and that's offensive. So are one of those, objectively speaking, morally evil? And I would say, obviously, a middle finger in of itself is not evil. The bottom of a shoe in of itself is not evil. Now, the intention behind it of what you're saying to another individual might be the aspect of evil, but how that expresses itself culturally is going to be different in the cultures. And so, descriptively, I agree there is differences between cultures, you know what I mean, of how people behave and how people act. But to say, here's what humanity does, even, for example, that we have laws, don't kill, that the fact that we do that doesn't mean we ought to do that. So we want to make a distinction between being descriptive about cultures, being descriptive about people, and being prescriptive of what we ought to do. And so an ethical discussion deals with what men and women ought to do. Like, you ought to tell the truth. Is that why? You know what I mean? Evolution might tell us at points it's beneficial for your survival to lie, or bear false testimony, or even to kill, or whatever it may be. So I would just say that if naturalism's the case, we have no facts that tell us what we ought to do. You know what I mean? You can never go somewhere. You can't go to a lab and look at something and says, "Thou shalt not kill." You know what I mean? You can't. That is a non-empirical. I would argue fact. It's a non-empirical fact, and if you can only know empirical facts, you cannot know anything to do with morality. And one of the things that's kind of interesting, and I think even where we're at culturally, A.J. Ayer is a atheist philosopher. He's dead now, but logical positivism was a popular philosophy mid-last century, early to mid-last century, and it began to die out. But the basic idea he called it emotivism, was his ethical philosophy, because he was radically consistent empiricist, and he knew that you can't empirically verify moral facts. And so he says, when two people get together and they have different cultural backgrounds, you have nothing left to debate or discuss but to berate one another. And so I think that's kind of like, why are much political discourse and discussion? Because all we can do is berate, because we don't think we can reason through our ethics anymore. We just have to berate our opponents. And so that's kind of where we're at, because we're not discussing facts. We're just going after what we prefer, you know what I mean? And if you're a little kid and you really love your mint chocolate chip ice cream and someone else is taking it, you get upset, you throw a fit, and that's kind of where we're at culturally. Culturally, we're very immature. We're kind of throwing fits, and it's a sign of immaturity, not of cultural going to maturity. So when it comes to the ethical debate, I would say, yeah, two things are there. If we're in a world of naturalism, there are no oughts, because that's not a natural category. What we have, and so I would say you need two things. You need a personal being, because morality deals with persons. And for example, like, I don't have an ethical duty to this chair aside from it being someone else's property. If it's my chair and I break it, no one really cares. Now, if I was to break your arm, then suddenly, since you're a personal being. So I would say that the nature of ethics requires persons. And so if personality, if you think of evolution, personality is way downstream from material. You know what I mean? It's a product of historical contingency. And so, whereas as Christians, we'd say, no, backing the universe, fundamental to the impersonal is the personal. So we have a personal being. So I would say that we need a personal being, and not only a personal being, but an absolute personal being, like what we have in Christian monotheism. And because what you end up having there is, because if you have an absolute that's not personal, you don't have duties and obligations to it. So if we just absolutize logic, well, we don't have a duty, like, there's a sense in which we have a duty and obligation because we're humans and how the things play out. But if it's just an abstraction out there somewhere, we don't have or to the good, even if there's an abstract good and it's impersonal, I don't have a duty and obligation to it. It's just a giant absolute chair, you know what I mean? But then the minute it becomes personal, then I have a duty and obligation to it. But if it's not, but if that person's not absolute, you can't enforce justice. You can't, you know what I mean? You can fight for it, but ultimately you'd be at the whims of maybe someone else who's stronger. And so there's no maybe confidence or hope that the good could actually win. Maybe evil triumphs. So as Christians, I want to maintain that the personal and the absolute is the standard of ethics and morality. There's nothing outside of that or over it that we actually have the duty and obligation towards. So I'd say it's Christian theism that gives us the personal and the absolute. And it's also Christian theism that gives us the Trinity, which shows in the Godhead there's love. So in something like a hard Unitarian religion, the nature of God is not really a loving being. He's just kind of there. I would argue he's maybe even static in a way. Or he had to create the world to show his love, because he was up there for all eternity being like, well, what do I do? I love, but there's nothing to love. Whereas in the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit has always love. So the root of Christian ethics is always love, is always service, is always humility. It's not pride, it's not arrogance, it's not domination over others, sort of thing. But something like, but I would say where there's a Unitarian God, there is often that element of we have to dominate, because the nature of God is not one of love and one of service, but it's one of just brute authority. So when it comes to the ethical discussion, and we've kind of touched on some of these things, but as Christians, why do we think murder's wrong? Because God is life. Murder's not wrong because of 3.8 billion years of evolution, and we don't like it. You know, murder, the shedding of innocent blood is wrong because God is life. The reason lying's wrong and infidelity's wrong. And so as Christians, we want to root all of our ethics into the character of God. And so even when we deal with the wicked, we want to be gracious to the wicked, because we know that we were wicked and God was gracious to us. And so when we look at the whole picture of who Yahweh is, and Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and how they reveal themselves in Scripture, that's the basis of Christian ethics. And what we want to do with the unbeliever is, they don't believe what they say. You know what I mean? You don't have people all upset over a school shooting because they don't think there's anything wrong in the world. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. I'd just be practical. Why do we have a whole Me Too thing? Because people know that there's something wrong in the world. And if it's all a construct, they have to admit that the objection to rape is just a societal construct. And if you think about what that does, so we'll just take something like a baby being tortured. If it's culture that determines it, there's nothing evil about torturing a baby. It's just that we don't like it. So it's like if all of us go to eat ice cream and we're all like, ugh, that's really the same category of, if we make it subjective to what the culture has determined, we're in a place where we're really no different than just saying, yeah, we don't like eating that food. You know what I mean? So since we all have a certain allergic reaction to the torturing of a baby, therefore it's wrong. Whereas I would say, no, even if everybody celebrated the torturing of the baby, it's still objectively evil because it transcends our culture. And I think that's one of the things we don't think through the implications of what we're actually saying. And the bottom line is original sin. We want to be autonomous, and you throw in a culture that has enough Christianity that's influenced its thinking. We want to be compassionate, we want to be loving, and so we think we can kind of get by, but we don't realize that like we do kind of have like the influence of Christianity, 2,000 years of Christianity influencing the West. We have our morality, but we look at the rest of the world, even as we decline, I believe, we're generally not fleeing to the rest of the world where Christianity has not flourished. You know what I mean? We're not generally like, oh yeah, let's live under Chinese government. Let's go live in Saudi government. We're not fleeing to those places, and they haven't been thoroughly influenced by Christianity. The West has, and that influence might be waning. So I would just say very practically, intellectually, I would say it's Christianity that has the basis of morality. No other philosophy. I don't even think Islam does, even though they're alternative religion. So I would say that other religions can't really give us an ethic, nor does forms of secularism that does not have a personal transcendent back in the universe. So I think when it comes to ethics, it's actually our strongest place, and that's one of the things that I think we need to pound home kind of relentlessly. But within that, we also have to admit that even as Christians, there have been Christians who have done evil things, and so it doesn't mean we have to go defend everything any Christian has ever done. But the beauty of Christianity is not that we commit the no true Scotsman fallacy that, oh, well, they're just, oftentimes people are like, oh, well, they're not a Christian. We have an objective standard of what it means, of what Christian ethics are. You know what I mean? So the idea of King David, that he was an adulterer and, kind of sent a man off to be killed, he was objectively wrong in that. That doesn't mean that Judaism at that point, Judaism or the covenant was false. It just meant that David was a hypocrite and he got revealed as a prophet. So I think as Christians, we need to pound home the normative aspect of ethics, but not in a bare morality sort of way, but even in a kind of more in a virtue way, not in a bare law sort of way, but that truth is beautiful, that faithfulness is glorious, and those sorts of things. And there's a better way forward as a culture, because I think we kind of know that as a culture, it sucks to be lied to, and it sucks to be cheated on. It sucks, and these things are evil, and it rips apart our social fabric, and many people experience those things. And so, but I think we also need to throw a nod to the culture that part of the reason they want their relativism is they think that relativism is going to give you respect and tolerance towards another person. You know what I mean? So if I'm somewhat relative of my beliefs, I'm not going to, if they think of an absolutist, they think of Hitler. That's their immediate connotation. Well, I would just say, no, he's the ultimate relativist. You know what I mean? So he's not a moral absolutist. He's an absolutist in himself. Well, it's all relative. I'm the absolute being. Then he becomes a personal tyrant. You know what I mean? Because he's not absolute, but he's very personal. He's going to impose himself. So what they think is going to happen is if we become relativists, we avoid ISIS, we avoid Hitler, we avoid all these evil Mao, and we avoid these evil people down through history. But what I would say is, if relativism is true, they didn't do anything wrong. They may not have done your construct. So we want to, and I think it's even one of the things where we argue we err, is there's a sense in which, like, as image bearers of God, we still want to say, I understand where you want to get, you know what I mean? And even in the context when tolerance, with some Locke and some other people coming out, like as Christians, in the context of Christianity, tolerance makes a lot of sense. In the context of pluralism, it begins to lose, it seems to have the appearance of meaning, but I think it starts to lose its context because we can't all coexist in a way. You know what I mean? The communists and the capitalists can't coexist. Someone's going to do something with the property. You know what I mean? And who and when and why. And same thing when Sharia law can't coexist with secular law. Something's got to give. And so at some point we have to advocate for an intolerance. But I think if we grasp the Christian gospel, we have the tolerance and the intolerance that we actually want. We have an absolute standard where there's grace, there's mercy, there's kindness, and we don't have to throw throw caution to the wind for the sake of somehow we have to all get along. And so I think those are the aspects that we should understand where they're trying to get, and I think oftentimes we don't give them the benefit of the doubt of where they're trying to get. So we want to do that, but we also kind of like the old instruction things, like, well, you can't get there from here. So I understand where you want to get, but your worldview doesn't get us there. It actually makes us in a worse place, and it's actually Christianity that is the way forward. On racial discussions, Christianity is the way forward. Male-female discussions, Christianity is the way forward. The whole Me Too thing, you guys wanted a sexual revolution where we have to throw off all cultural norms. Well, how do we know Harvey Weinstein's not just the cultural revolutionary? You know what I mean? 40 years ago, the adulteress was the cultural revolutionary. The homosexual is a cultural revolutionary. Why isn't Harvey Weinstein just a current cultural revolutionary? You know what I mean? We all look back with fondness to Socrates corrupting the youth of Athens, and so but the fact that the sexual revolution and things were going on, I'm being a little simplistic, but the fact that the sexual revolution has existed in this culture, we want to throw off all norms, then we melt down over Harvey Weinstein. I just want to say, well, he's a sexual revolutionary. You guys he's a Hugh Hefner of our generation. You just don't appreciate it yet. You know what I mean? And so when Hugh first published his magazine, he wrote under assumed name. You know what I mean? He's like, well, just in case it goes over like a lead balloon, let me give you a fake name just in case I need to go back to my normal life. And why don't we give Harvey the benefit of the doubt? Because we know there are norms, and everybody intuitively knows it because they're made in the image of God. But the challenge is where we draw those norms is what they want to get away with their sexuality, but they don't want someone else to get away with their sexuality or whatever the issue may be. So those are the sorts of things that need to be teased out. But I think ultimately the Christian perspective on ethics is the way forward, and it's because it's not a bare law. It's rooted in Yahweh and His character.